$57.89 billion. That's how much the global microtransaction market pulled in during 2024 alone, which means free-to-play games generated more revenue last year than the entire film industry. Every single game responsible for that number cost nothing to download. An entire industry built on giving away games for free has engineered one of the most profitable business models in entertainment history, and the whole thing traces back to a 1957 science experiment involving a rat, a lever, and a food pellet. By the end of this video, you'll understand every psychological lever these companies pull to get you to spend, from loot boxes and battle passes to premium currencies and dark patterns. More importantly, you'll know exactly how to spot each one. None of this is about telling you to stop playing games. This is about making sure that when you spend, that decision actually belongs to you and not to someone who designed a system to make the decision for you. Let's get into it. Understanding how modern games get you to spend starts with one concept called a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. That sounds complicated, but it really isn't. Back in 1957, psychologists Charles Furster and B.F. Skinner published a book called Schedules of Reinforcement, where they put animals in boxes with levers and tracked what happened. Press the lever, sometimes you get food, and the key word there is sometimes. When rewards came at unpredictable intervals, not every press and not every fifth press, but at random, the animals pressed that lever more than under any other condition. And here's the part that matters most. Those animals were also the most resistant to stopping, even long after the rewards disappeared entirely. Skinner himself put it this way, and this is a direct quote: "If the gambling establishment cannot persuade a patron to turn over money with no return, it may achieve the same effect by returning part of the patron's money on a variable ratio schedule." He was describing slot machines. But anyone who has ever opened a loot box, pulled a gotcha banner, or ripped open a card pack in a sports video game has experienced the exact same mechanism. And that's not opinion. Researchers have actually measured it. A 2024 study published in Science Direct hooked participants up to electrodermal sensors that tracked involuntary physiological arousal while they opened loot boxes in a sports video game and pulled simulated slot machine spins. The physiological responses were comparable, meaning your body literally cannot tell the difference between a loot box and a slot machine. That finding is the foundation everything else in this video sits on. Variable ratio reinforcement is the engine, and loot boxes, battle passes, and premium currency are just different body kits bolted onto the same machine. Loot boxes deserve the first deep look because they're the most studied and the most controversial monetization mechanic in gaming right now. The concept is dead simple. You pay real money or virtual currency you bought with real money for a randomized container of digital items where you have no idea what you're getting. Rarity tiers make the good stuff extremely unlikely to appear, and you can never stop at just one because the reward you actually wanted always feels like it's just one more pull away. For years, the gaming industry insisted none of this qualified as gambling. A VP of Legal and Government Affairs at a major game publisher testified before the UK Parliament in June of 2019 and told lawmakers, quote, "We don't call them loot boxes, we look at them as surprise mechanics." She compared card packs in a sports game to candy eggs and collectible toys and described them as actually quite ethical and quite fun. Researchers at multiple universities pushed back hard on that framing. Dr. Aaron Drummond at Massey University in New Zealand and Dr. James Sauer at the University of Tasmania published a paper in Nature Human Behavior in 2018 titled "Video Game Loot Boxes Are Psychologically Akin to Gambling." They argued loot boxes meet the psychological criteria of gambling because players stake real money on a randomized outcome of uncertain value, and both researchers specifically flagged children's exposure as a risk. That same year, Dr. David Zendel at York St. John University and Dr. Paul Cairns at the University of York surveyed over 7,000 gamers in a study published in PLOS One and found a statistically significant link between loot box spending and problem gambling severity. They replicated that finding in 2019 with a second study, and the evidence kept stacking. A scoping review by Montiel and Bastera Gonzalez, published in PLOS 1 in January of 2022, looked at 13 studies and found that 12 of them established what the authors called unambiguous connections between loot box engagement and problem gambling behavior. Every single empirical study conducted to date has found a positive correlation, and not one has contradicted the pattern. The financial dimension makes this even more uncomfortable. Roughly 5% of loot box purchasers spend over $100 per month, and nearly a third of that top 5% meet clinical criteria for problem gambling. Those aren't people making informed entertainment purchases. They're people trapped in a reinforcement loop that was engineered to keep them spending. Loot boxes represent the Western expression of randomized monetization, and gacha represents the Eastern one, which may actually be more sophisticated. The name comes from gachapon, those Japanese capsule toy vending machines where you insert a coin and receive a random toy. The earliest known digital version appeared in 2004 inside the game MapleStory, which sold gachapon tickets for about 100 yen each in Japan. But the game that perfected gacha for a worldwide audience is Genshin Impact, developed by HoYoverse and launched on September 28, 2020. The revenue numbers on this game are staggering. Roughly $100 million came in during the first 2 weeks, which was enough to recoup the entire development budget. Mobile spending alone hit $1 billion within 6 months. By the game's 4th anniversary in September of 2024, mobile revenue had reached $6.3 billion. And across all platforms, lifetime player spending is estimated to have crossed $10 billion by the end of 2025, making it the fastest mobile game ever to reach that figure. Every dollar came from a game that is completely free to download. The way it works is that players wish on character banners, with each wish costing 160 primogems, which translates to roughly $2.40 at the base exchange rate. Your chance of pulling a 5-star character, the kind you actually want, sits at 0.6% per pull. Now the game includes what's called a pity system, which sounds generous, but operates as a spending accelerator. After about 74 pulls, a soft pity mechanic kicks in and increases your odds, and at 90 pulls you hit hard pity, where you're guaranteed a 5-star. But even at hard pity, there's a 50-50 chance the 5-star you receive isn't the featured character you were chasing, and if you lose that coin flip, you need to climb all the way back to pity again to guarantee the one you wanted. What that means in practice is that players who want certainty need to save 180 pulls or 28,800 primogems. Converted to real money, that works out to roughly $360 to $540 for a single character in a free game. The FTC cited exactly these numbers in their January 2025 complaint against HoYoverse. Bureau of Consumer Protection Director Samuel Levine put it bluntly. Genshin Impact deceived children, teens, and other players into spending hundreds of dollars on prizes they stood little chance of winning. HoYoverse settled for $20 million, but the game had already earned more than $10 billion by that point. And here's the psychological hook that makes pity systems so effective. They feel like a safety net, like the game is being generous by telling you, don't worry, you're guaranteed something eventually. But what they actually do is set an anchor inside your brain that whispers, you're already 40 pulls in, you're halfway to pity, and if you stop now, those 40 pulls were wasted. That is textbook sunk cost fallacy, and it is engineered into the system on purpose. Loot boxes and gacha revolve around randomized purchases, but battle passes operate on a completely different principle. Battle passes are about purchasing an obligation. Valve pioneered the modern battle pass in Dota 2 back in 2013, but Fortnite turned it into an industry standard starting in 2018. The setup is straightforward. You pay around $8 to $10 for a seasonal pass that gives you access to roughly 100 tiers of rewards, including cosmetic skins, emotes, and loading screens, all unlocked by completing challenges over a 10 to 12-week season. Every item on the Battle Pass is exclusive, and when the season ends, those items vanish forever. From a game design standpoint, this is brilliantly constructed. Once you've bought the pass, you have a reason to log in every single day, not necessarily because the game is fun, though it might be, but because you paid for those rewards and they will disappear if you don't earn them. Completing a typical battle pass in a popular shooter requires somewhere between 50 and 100 hours within a single season. Industry analysts at Deconstructor of Fun describe battle passes in 2022 as primarily a retention and engagement mechanism where monetization functions as a secondary benefit. Put differently, the real product being sold isn't the skins. The real product is your time, your daily logins, and your consistent engagement that turns you into a recurring visitor who's far more likely to make additional purchases in the item shop. Spending data backs this up. A 2018 survey found that 69% of players in a popular battle royale game had made at least one in-game purchase, averaging $85 per person. The financial scale of all this became visible during a major trial in 2021 when court documents revealed that a single free-to-play shooter generated over $5 billion in 2018 alone and over $9 billion across 2018 and 2019 combined. Over 650 million accounts have been registered for the game, and that's worth repeating. All of that revenue came from a game that costs absolutely nothing to download. This is where game companies pull off something that would trigger regulatory action if a bank tried it. Premium currency obfuscation works by converting real money into a proprietary virtual currency like V-Bucks, Genesis crystals, Primogems, or game points before you're allowed to spend anything. The exchange rates are never clean. A 2024 CFPB example found games pricing bundles at $2.95 for 320 coins, or $9.05 for 1,020 coins. And those odd amounts are completely deliberate because they make it nearly impossible to intuitively calculate how much a single item actually costs in real dollars. Genshin Impact pushes this even further with a multi-layer conversion system where real money buys Genesis crystals, which convert to Primogems, which then convert to intertwined fates. The FTC's 2025 complaint specifically cited that layering is deceptive, and by the time a player pulls the gacha lever, their brain has completely lost track of the real money flowing out of their account. None of that layering is accidental. The entire system exists to reduce what psychologists call the pain of paying, which is the natural hesitation humans feel when handing over real money for something. Premium currency numbs that hesitation, and the results speak for themselves. According to the CFPB, Americans spent roughly $56.6 billion on gaming in 2022 and $57 billion in 2023. Average per-gamer spending on in-game purchases climbed to $147 in 2024, up from $132 the year before. Everything described so far, the loot boxes, the gacha, the battle passes, the premium currency, those are mechanisms players interact with knowingly, even if they don't fully understand them. Dark patterns are different because they're the tricks companies use to get you to spend before you even realize a decision has been made. The FTC formally defined dark patterns in a 2022 staff report called Bringing Dark Patterns to Light, and then used that framework to extract the largest gaming-related settlement in U.S. history. In December of 2022, the FTC settled with a major game publisher for a combined $520 million. $275 million covered a COPPA penalty, which was the largest ever levied for a single FTC rule violation for collecting children's data without parental consent. The remaining $245 million addressed dark pattern-driven unwanted charges specifically. The dark patterns in that game worked like this. The purchase button sat directly adjacent to the preview button, and a single press during a loading screen or while the phone was waking from sleep could trigger an irreversible purchase with no confirmation step. Buried behind multiple navigation steps under Settings sat the refund option, which the FTC labeled a roach motel because getting in was easy but getting out was hard. FTC Chair Lena Khan described what happened. She said the company used privacy-invasive default settings and deceptive interfaces that tricked users, including teenagers and children. The refund numbers tell you how widespread the damage was. By June of 2025, the FTC had distributed roughly $200 million in refunds to nearly 1 million players, with the average refund landing at about $130 per person. Beyond confusing interfaces, dark patterns in gaming include artificial scarcity through item shops that rotate daily to create fear of missing out, pay-to-skip mechanics through energy timers in mobile games that artificially gate progress unless you pay, and notification spam timed to the exact window when you've been away the longest to pull you back in. The FTC described this last tactic directly as making a free version of a game so cumbersome and labor-intensive that the player is induced to unlock new features with in-app purchases. This is the part that reframes everything, because the picture gets uncomfortable when you examine who's actually generating all this revenue. The gaming industry borrowed the term whale from casinos, where it refers to the tiny percentage of customers who spend vastly disproportionate amounts. Data on this pattern has stayed consistent across multiple industry studies. Analytics firms have repeatedly found that 1 to 2% of players generate 50 to 70% of total mobile game revenue. A 2013 study found the top 1% of paying mobile gamers accounted for 33% of all spending, with the top 20% responsible for over 90%. Only 1.83% of mobile gamers make any in-app purchase at all, according to a 2024 report, and only 28% of those players spend a second time. When we talk about a microtransaction market worth nearly $60 billion, the reality behind that number is that the vast majority of that money flows from a very small number of people spending a very large amount. The individual spending figures tell the story clearly. A 2023 analysis found that the average high spender in one card game had a lifetime spend of around $913, and in a Mobile Kingdom game, that figure climbed to $1,297. The top 5% of paying players in free-to-play strategy games averaged $276 per month. A separate 2023 survey found that nearly 6% of MMO players had spent over $1,000 lifetime on a single game, while 89% reported spending at least some real money. This entire model depends on a small group of heavy spenders. Free players provide the ecosystem, the populated servers, the opponents, and the social validation that makes rare skins desirable. But the revenue comes from a concentrated few, and every system we've covered, the variable ratio reinforcement, the sunk cost passes, and the obfuscated currencies, exist to find, engage, and retain those spenders. This is where the financial stakes become personal for a lot of people watching, especially parents. According to the CFPB's 2024 report, 45.7 million children in the United States play video games, which represents over 80% of kids between the ages of 5 and 18. The design systems described throughout this video do not age-gate themselves at the psychological level. The CFPB issued a consumer advisory in August of 2024 with a title that pulls no punches. Video games are targeting your children to get into your wallet. The advisory warned that gaming companies use design tricks, technology, and surveillance data to entice players into spending money. Individual stories illustrate the pattern. A child covered by ABC News racked up $4,000 on his parents' credit cards while playing video games. Across the Atlantic, a disabled mother discovered that her son had spent £1,200 on game skins, leaving her unable to afford food and electricity. Academic literature shows that loot boxes appear in 49% of games rated for ages 7 and up, and in 93% of games rated for ages 12 and up, which are ratings that explicitly include children in the target audience. The FTC's January 2025 settlement over Genshin Impact became the first federal enforcement action to specifically target gacha mechanics and their impact on minors, banning loot box sales to players under 16 without verifiable parental consent. September of 2024 saw two more regulatory moves land at once. The European Consumer Organization and 22 member groups filed a coordinated complaint with the European Commission alleging that game companies mislead gamers, particularly children, into spending. And Australia became the most aggressive Western market by implementing mandatory minimum age classifications, where any game with paid loot boxes now receives a minimum M rating for ages 15 and up, and games with simulated gambling receive an R18+ classification. The Australian Institute of Family Studies found that young people who played simulated gambling games were 40% more likely to spend real money on gambling as young adults. Taking a step back to look at how governments have responded reveals a consistent pattern, an industry that moved faster than regulators could keep up. Belgium acted first in April of 2018 when the Belgian Gaming Commission declared paid loot boxes in games like sports titles and shooters to be illegal games of chance and threatened criminal prosecution. Several companies pulled or modified their loot boxes in Belgium after the ruling, but a 2023 study found that 82% of the top 100 grossing iPhone games in Belgium still contained randomized monetization 3 years after the ban. The Netherlands fined a major publisher €5 million in 2019 for card packs in a sports game, and the district court upheld that fine. The publisher appealed all the way to the Council of State, the Netherlands' highest administrative court, and on March 9th of 2022, the court overturned the ruling, deciding that the card packs were part of a game of skill rather than a standalone game of chance. The UK Parliament held extensive hearings where over 30,000 people submitted evidence, but on July 18th of 2022, the government decided against amending the Gambling Act and opted for industry self-regulation. In the United States, the FTC has emerged as the primary enforcement body. The settlement from December 2022 through March of 2023 totaled $520 million and remains the record. The gacha-focused settlement in January of 2025 came in at $20 million and was the first to explicitly target gacha mechanics. That same month, a Belgian court case was referred to the Court of Justice of the European Union, which could establish platform-level loot box liability across the entire EU. China was actually ahead of everyone on this, requiring loot box odds disclosure back in 2017. App Store platforms updated their rules to require disclosure in late 2017 for one and mid-2019 for the other. Fairness requires acknowledging the other side here because this is a complex issue with real counter-arguments. The gaming industry's position rests on a few pillars. Cosmetic-only items don't affect gameplay, so players are paying for aesthetics rather than advantage. Loot box items in most games can't be cashed out for real money, which means they don't meet the legal definition of gambling in most jurisdictions. And the player choice argument holds that no one forces anyone to buy anything in a free game. Those arguments carry technical accuracy in many cases, and the Dutch Council of State agreed with parts of that reasoning when it overturned the fine. But here's what those arguments leave out. The psychological mechanisms driving the spending, including variable ratio reinforcement, sunk cost fallacy, and premium currency obfuscation, all operate below the level of conscious choice. When your physiological arousal response to opening a loot box is indistinguishable from your response to pulling a slot machine lever, the concept of player choice takes on a very different meaning. The revenue distribution also tells its own story. 1 to 2% of players generate 50 to 70% of revenue. The average high spender in some games exceeds $1,000 lifetime, and 18% of Japanese gamers in their 20s report that microtransaction spending interferes with covering essential expenses like rent. Calling all of that fun and ethical and quite enjoyable the way it was described before Parliament requires looking away from a lot of data. So what do you actually do with all of this information now that you have it? The first step is learning the systems, which you just did. Understanding what a variable ratio reinforcement schedule is, recognizing how premium currency obscures real cost, and seeing that battle passes are engineered to create obligation, that knowledge functions as a defense on its own. These systems work best on people who don't know they're being used. Second, do the math on premium currency every single time. When a game asks you to buy gems or coins, take 10 seconds to calculate the real dollar cost of what you're about to purchase. Converting a gacha game's gem cost to actual dollars reveals that a single 5-star character can run $360 to $540. And once you see that number, the pity system stops feeling like a safety net and starts looking like what it really is, which is a price tag hidden behind 3 layers of conversion. Third, learn to recognize the sunk cost trap when it activates. If you bought a battle pass and you're sitting on tier 47 with 3 weeks left and you're not having fun anymore, the money you spent is gone whether you finish or not. That's the definition of a sunk cost. The rational financial move is doing whatever makes you happiest with your remaining time rather than grinding for cosmetics you'll forget about next season. Fourth, track your spending. The CFPB reported that Americans spent roughly $57 billion on gaming in 2023, and the average gamer spent $147 on in-game purchases in 2024. Whether that number sounds like a lot or a little depends entirely on your budget and your awareness of what's leaving your account. The problem was never spending money on games. The problem is spending money on games without realizing how much is going out, because the system was designed to obscure exactly that. And for parents specifically, check the age ratings, check the linked payment methods, and know that almost half of games rated for ages 7 and up contain loot boxes. Games are great. Nothing in this video is telling you to stop playing, and nothing is telling you to never spend money on a game you love. A $10 battle pass can be an excellent deal if you're genuinely going to enjoy the season. But the same industry that made gaming free also turned it into one of the most psychologically engineered spending environments on the planet. $57 billion doesn't come from informed consumers making careful choices. That number comes from variable ratio reinforcement, premium currency obfuscation, sunk cost manipulation, dark pattern interfaces, and a whale economy where a tiny fraction of players fund the entire system. The companies telling Parliament that loot boxes are surprise mechanics are the same ones paying $520 million in FTC settlements for dark patterns. Games that cost nothing to download are engineered so that chasing a single character can run $500. Understanding how monetization psychology works doesn't make you less of a gamer. It makes you a better one. And understanding how spending traps work doesn't make you cheap. It makes you someone who controls where their money goes, instead of letting a reinforcement schedule decide for them. That's not a restriction, that is a skill. If you found this useful, hit subscribe, because we break down how money actually works, even in places you wouldn't expect it. I'll see you in the next one.